Welcome back, everyone. Today, I was playing against Wesley So in the loser's bracket of the Chess Champions Tour. Now, as some of you may or may not know, this event has a double elimination. So what that means is that if you lose one match, you are not eliminated. You have to lose 2 times. So therefore, even though I lost yesterday to Magnus Carlsen, today I was playing against Wesley in the final. If I win this match, I move on to play Magnus. However, there is one key difference. This match was a best of 2, like all the other matches in the lower bracket, as opposed to being a best of 4 like in the top bracket. So let's jump right into the game in 1 second once I adjust this a little bit more so you guys can see the edge of the board. All right. So, best of 2, 15 minutes, 2-second increment, anything goes. Now, like every other match, I am seeded number 6, which means the higher rated seed, Wesley So, number 2, opens with the white pieces in our mini match. So, first game, we get e4. I play e5, knight f3, knight to c6, bishop c4. And as always, we get our classic Gucci pianissimo. So we get a6, a4, bishop a7, all very normal here up to this point. We played this in our previous match here. And now Wesley chooses to play this move b4, trying to take some space on the queen side. Now, in this position, I simply lost my mind. Now, simplest way of putting this is that in this moment, I was not really thinking, and I was sort of just playing all the moves really quickly, and I immediately play this move, knight g4. Now, knight g4 is a mistake in this position. What I am supposed to play is h6, and the reason is very simple. White normally will develop with a move like knight bd2, or say h3. Let's just say knight bd2. After knight bd2, black can now play knight g4. And the reason is that now white can play rook to e2, guarding the pawn, and black can play something like king h8 with moves like f5. The problem with playing knight g4 right away, however, is that white can go rook a2, guarding, and white has not developed this knight to d2 yet. Now, this is very, very critical for a couple of reasons. Let's say I play king h8, h3, and I try to sack the pony with f5. The problem is now white can take on f5, and after knight takes f2, rook takes f2, bishop takes f2, king takes f2. Let's just say d5 is played here. White goes bishop b3, you take, white can now go king g1, and white is doing great here. Now, one of the big differences is that there's no knight on d2, so the d3 pawn is not under attack. Now, mind you, this is very advanced. It's not something I expect beginners to pick up on right away, but it makes a very, very big difference. Now, this is the sort of stuff also I would say that when you're newer to the game, don't worry about move orders specifically. Just try to have your straightforward plan and follow it. Whereas at the higher levels, a lot of it does come down to which piece can you move to one square, what is the pawn structure, what are the very minor differences. So, I play knight g4, rook a2, and now in this position, I play king h8, he goes h3, and I play knight f6 back, because of course, as we just looked at, f5 is no good. Now, the problem is that now after knight bd2, white has simply gained a tempo here. I put my king on h8, and white has rook a2 in return, and more importantly, I can no longer go for my classic setup plan with rook e8, knight f1, and bishop e6 to trade the bishops, because if I ever play rook e8, spaghetti-o, I'm hanging the pawn on f7. So, after knight bd2, basically I put my king on h8, which is bad. I can't go rook e8, and white has just gained a lot of time here. Additionally, white might even be able to play ideas like b5 at some point after h6 to say there's some b5 trade in knight e7. I no longer have tricks with bishop f2, because let's just say white plays rook e2 takes. The bishop guards the rook here on a2, whereas if the rook is on a1, for example, sometimes it's not quite the same. So let's just say you go some b5, takes. I'm just going to make some random moves just to show you guys. And basically here the rook on a1 would be under attack, whereas on a2 it's guarded. So basically what I've done is I've just given white a bunch of free time to get his rook on a better square, have ideas like b5, even play in the center, and I can't follow my traditional idea with rook e8 and bishop e6. So it's a bit of a disaster here. That being said, you have to keep playing and going forward. There's no going backwards. So knight f1 is played, and now I go knight e7 here. Knight g3 is played, and I go knight g6. Also, when I say you go forward, that's become one of my mantras. Now, one thing that I do, and this is sort of going off on a tangent, is I have watched a lot of shows on Netflix, and the show is not a new show, but I remember there was a show that I watched, I think it was 2 seasons. It was called something like The Imposters, and it's about people who get tricked, and they basically, they're trying to trick people to make money and other things. And one of the great sayings from that show was, I believe it was always forward, never back. Never backward, never back, or never backward. So that's sort of in my mind. So I play knight g6, we get queen b3 here. Now, I thought queen b3 was a mistake. I thought here Wesley should have just played d4 right away, taking the big center here. He's got great pawn control in the center of the board. If I trade here and play d5, which is one idea that I can go for, after takes here and queen c2, c6, and something like bishop to d2, Sorry, not queen c2. What am I saying? Not queen c2. Sorry, I meant queen d2. And after a move like c6, for example, I think white can go something like knight e5, maybe even something like rook a3 with rook e3 ideas. Even bishop a3 and b5 feels very good. And just based off some games I've played in the structure, I think white is doing really well. Instead, Wesley goes queen b3. Now I go queen e8. Now the problem, or the reason that I think this is slightly wrong, is first of all, now with the queen on e8 guarding the pawn, I can play bishop e6. Additionally, with the queen on b3, I can play b5 to trap the juicer on c4. If white plays bishop d2, I have b5 takes, bishop d5 and c6. And once again, spaghetti-o, your bishop on d5 is completely trapped. So Wesley plays b5 here, and now I take. Now this, of course, also a mistake here. I should have played bishop e6 right away, and after d4, maybe the game will transpose, but I think that after takes here, I might have a slightly improved version where I can go bishop b6, because now I'm threatening to trade and win the rook on a2. For example, say white goes bishop e3, takes, and bada bing, bada boom, I win a pawn on b5. Additionally, white cannot play a5 here because I take on b5, attacking the queen. And if white takes on a6, after rook takes a6, this pawn on a4 is now potentially a long-term weakness. And once again, we also have the classic right triangle. So after b5, I pretty much instantly took. And the reasoning behind this was my brain wasn't working. I thought, okay, I just go bishop e6. We're going to trade the bishops, trade the queens. Game is going to end in a draw very soon. However, after going bishop e6, Wesley plays this very good move d4, taking control of the center. And as soon as he played this move, I realized that I was in real trouble. So now I trade on c4, and I go bishop b6. He trades, goes bishop e3 here, and now I play this move queen e8. Now the idea behind queen e8, quite straightforward. Guard the pawn on e5, but also try to put pressure on the pawn on b5 as well, and maybe long-term even some pressure on the pawn on e4. Wesley goes queen b4, and now I play knight d7. Now, if I was a little bit more sort of in the zone, I suspect I would have found something better than knight d7. But here I was sort of just making moves quickly, just sort of not really trying to think that much and just play logical moves. So I go knight d7, plays knight d2. Another great move, by the way, that I overlooked with the idea of putting the pony on c4, from whence it can attack the bishop on b6, but also there's a lot of pressure on this pawn on e5. And the third big thing is that the queen on b4 keeps an eye on this rook on f8 as well. So here I play knight h4 here. Now this move was simply based on a pure miscalculation, once again showing that I wasn't in my best form. What I probably should have done is played something like knight to f4 here, but after takes, knight f1, or knight e2, probably knight e2, I just felt that white should be better here with a big center. I mean, maybe I can go g5, but it just feels very, very sketchy here with these pawns pushed on the king side. Bishop is staring at a dead diagonal with this pawn on d4 in the way, and at some point I assume e5 is coming in and I'm going to get crushed. Computer actually does not think this is so bad, however. Instead, I play knight h4, Wesley goes knight c4, and now I take. What I would love to play here is queen e6, but the problem with queen e6 is that now white can take the bishop, because if I take with a knight, he can now take on e5. And the problem is I cannot recapture with the pawn, because then I hang the rook on f8. And after I play queen takes e5, for example, bishop d4, white is a great wooden shield, bishop is aiming towards the king on h8, and white is doing fantastically well. So I followed my plan, which was to take on d4 and play f5. Now, initially, I thought this was actually great, because after takes, I thought I could take, and white can't fossilize me with a move like bishop h6, because surely the rook's hanging. But as soon as I played f5, I realized that no, actually, after takes, bishop h6, the queen on b4 is guarding the rook on e1, so I'm just down a pawn for nothing. So instead, I try to come up with a backup plan, which is to go queen f7 here. Now, again, this too was based on a complete miscalculation. I thought after queen f7, knight takes b6, I'm great. I'm getting the knight to d5, blockading the pawn. He's going to lose the pawn on f5, and I actually might even be a little bit better if I can achieve that. However, once again, as Wesley was thinking after queen f7, I realized that he could trade and go d5 here. And the problem with d5 is now this knight on the rim is indeed very dim. I cannot move and take the pawn on d5 because I hang the pony, and the only square I can move the knight to is to take on f5. f3 is covered by the pawn on g2. g2 hangs the knight, and after knight f5, we end up in this very, very unpleasant endgame with queen d4, where we have even material. We both have queens and rooks, and we have 5 pawns, but I have double pawns, first of all, and I also have a weakness on d6, and he can create an outpost on e6 for the rook on e1, which will move there. So even though material is even, I'm in a lot of trouble. Additionally, my king is very weak here. If I ever move the rook off the 8th rank, there's always a check. If I put my king on h7, there are always threats of checks on the light square diagonal. So So I go king h7, Wesley plays rook e7, I go rook f7, and now he trades. Now, initially when this happened, I was a little bit surprised. So I thought that with rooks on the board, he had better winning chances than in a queen and pawn endgame. But as I very quickly realized here, even though it feels like I'm okay, I'm not okay, mainly because I'm playing down a pawn due to the b file, where I have the tower of power, which can't do anything, and white can still play queen e6. He's got a 3-on-2 on the king side as well, so it's pretty scary. So here I go king h8. Wesley now plays g4, and here I play this g5 move. The idea behind g5, stop white from pushing p with either f4 or h4 and taking more space. Wesley goes king g2, which apparently is a blunder. I don't know why, but he does it. I go king g7, and now he checks, and I go king g6. It's worth noting that I can never trade the queens here, because after trade, and this is not even necessarily the only way to win, but after trade, it looks like my king's getting to e5, and I'm going to win the game, right? Because I'm winning a pawn. But the problem is, at the end of the day, even though material is even, I have these two pawns, which are not worth more than one pawn on b5. Those of you guys who are confused, I'm sorry, but sometimes 2 is not greater than 1. So after I take on f4, king f3, king e5, here there's h4, takes, and again, I have an extra pawn. The problem is that the pawns on b6 and b7 are going nowhere, so in fact, I'm just losing. I have to go king e6, there is g5, takes, king f7, white goes king e4, king g6, king d5, takes, and I very simply lose by 1 tempo. And that's all she wrote. So that is actually the big problem here, as I started to realize around this point that I have to be very careful about the king and pawn endgame. So he checks, I go back, he goes king g3, queen f6, queen e3, I've just moved my queen c3. We sort of dilly-dally a little bit here. We get to this position right here, bunch of moves, and now I go queen f8. Now the problem is, again, I'd love to trade and go king f6 and win the pawn, but after f4, this endgame is once again, I believe, completely losing, unless I'm insane. Wait, maybe I'm insane, or is the engine crazy? Wait. King e3? No, the engine's insane. It doesn't realize. Now the bar is going down, and white is winning with the protected pass pawn, because again, you run the king to the queen side, and you gobble all the queen side pawns. So I go queen f8, we get queen d7, I go back, check, back, king g2. Now I plot my queen on f4, check, and now queen e2. Now it's worth noting queen e3 here would actually, I think, lose the game, because I can trade, go king f6, and after king f3, king e5, e4, king d4, white is in Zugzwang. You cannot push the h pawn because I eat it. If you push the e pawn, I just take, and if you move the king, you also lose the pawn on e4. So white needs to keep it where white can get a pass pawn on the f file or the h or g files, because otherwise you're losing in the king and pawn endgame. So Wesley goes queen e2, and now here I play king f7 as my time is running low, and Wesley plays this move queen to e6, which is a huge blunder here. Wesley could have played this move queen to f3, and if he had played queen f3, this would have led to a king and pawn endgame where I am losing. I have no chance of surviving, because after queen to f6, white goes king g3. If I trade and go king f6, king e4, king g6, now white just plays f4. And after I take, again, it's very similar. The only difference is, of course, white has a pawn in the way, so you can't get the king in quickly, but it's the same thing. You go king e4, king to f6, and now you go h5 here. If king g7, you go king f5, king f7, g5, takes, and now you run the king over. Eventually, you eat all the pawns, make a queen, win the game. Additionally, if I go king g5 here, white goes king to f3, king f6, king f4, and we get the same thing where white is eventually going to jettison the h pawn in order to bring the king over to the queen side to eat all these pawns on d6, b6, and b7 as well. So fortunately for me here, Wesley just plays queen e6, and after king g7, the best part about this is that it's a threefold repetition, because Wesley at the start of this endgame played king g2 and king g3 and then back, so it was a threefold. Now I suspect Wesley did not realize that after king g7 it was a threefold, so I think he thought, well, I just give a check and then I can reset, think about it again, and then I'll come up with a better plan. But fortunately for me, it was a draw, and also especially fortunately for me, Wesley did not play queen to f3, because otherwise he would have won the game, the first game, 100.00% of the time, and I would have lost it 100.00% of the time as well. So I would have been in really bad shape needing to win in game 2. Now, game 2, I had the white pieces, and it was an interesting situation because after this draw where Wesley was pressing, was winning for a move, and clearly realized after the game that he had missed an instant win, I thought that maybe I should play and try to beat him. But when all is said and done, I thought, you know what, I'd rather go to Armageddon. It's better for the content. It's better for the drama. Fans love it. And so I made a quick draw in the Berlin defense like I did in our previous match. So we go to Armageddon. Now, for Armageddon, I made a bid of 8 minutes and 5 seconds, and to my surprise, Wesley bid, I believe, 8 minutes and 29 seconds. So as we're seeing, the progression or the meta and the theory behind Armageddon and the bids is evolving. Players are going lower and lower and lower. The reason that I bid 8 minutes and 5 seconds was not specifically to try and play some great mind game with Wesley, but it's that I felt I needed to be black in this game. Every game has been drawn between us. Whoever gets the black pieces has the best chances. Also because, frankly, in the game of chess, roughly 70% of games are drawn. So I bid 8 minutes and 5 seconds. Wesley bids 8:29, and I get the black pieces down roughly 7 minutes. So the game starts with e4. I play e5, knight to f3, knight c6, and now Wesley plays the great opening of the Scots. He plays the Scotch opening with d4. So I take, Wesley takes back, and now I play knight f6, trade, and e5. Now another example of how out of it I was I was just trying to move really, really quickly here, and I simply forgot what the right move was. As most people know, this is the Mies's variation of the Scotch opening, and you're supposed to play queen e7, pinning the pawn on e5, and after queen e2, knight d5, c4, there's bishop a6, knight b6, etc., etc. A lot of theory, and the show goes on. But I was so out of it that on autopilot, I just played knight d5 instantly, and as soon as I played it, I'm like, wait a second, what did I just do? Wesley goes bishop d3, developing the bishop, trying to castle the king, but also trying to put pressure on his diagonal towards h7 as well. So I go d6, trying to exchange this advanced pawn. He trades, and now I take back with the pawn. Now, what I should have done, because it was an Armageddon game, is I obviously should have just taken with the bishop. And after castles, knight d2, white is marginally better. Black has the two pawns on c7 and c6, which aren't great, but it's a very stable position with very traditional sort of play. Instead, after e takes c6, I take with the pawn. Now, if I can get my development completed, let's just say castles, just to illustrate it, something like this, for example, where I get all of my development completed, I am obviously fine. But the problem is that white has some moves that complicate the situation. So Wesley plays bishop e4 here, and now I play this move bishop a6. Now this is not what I wanted to do. In an Armageddon game where I'm down 7 minutes on the clock at the start, the last thing I want to do is play a position where I'm sacrificing material immediately, and he has more time to think, and I don't, and I'm going to have to be very, very precise. Also, it means the odds of me winning or losing are extremely high. So what I probably should have done is played bishop e6 here, but I was kind of worried about c4, honestly. Apparently, computer after knight before a3 thinks that I can play d5, or maybe the computer's just smoking something. But I was very worried, so I very quickly played bishop a6. Also, because if I go bishop b7 to guard the knight, after takes castles followed by knight c3, it just feels very, very unpleasant here. I have these ugly isolated double pawns on d6 and d5, and there's no clear plan for me. White's just going to develop the bishop, try to win the pawns. Very, very smooth, clean play for white, and I'm going to probably end up having to think and end up very low on time. So this would be a disaster. So I played bishop a6 right away. Idea is that I'm going to gambit material, but I stop white from castling. You cannot castle your king through check. It's also worth noting knight e7 is another move, but the problem after knight e7 and castles here is how am I finishing my development on the king side? Maybe I can go d5 and knight g6, but I'm always worried about moves like c4 and knight c3, putting tons of pressure on my center here, and it's going to be very hard. I'll have to use a lot of time to try to navigate the waters, and white, again, just has obvious moves. Put pressure on the pawn, rook e1, maybe develop bishop, maybe queen a4. Every move you only need to use a couple of seconds to figure out. So I decide to play bishop a6. Wesley trades, takes the juicer, and now I go rook c8. I'd love to go bishop e7 here and castle, but if I go bishop e7, I lose on the spot because of queen c6 check, collecting the bishop on a6. So I go rook c8 to stop the check. Knight c3 stops me from also capturing on c2. Bishop e7, bishop e3, and now I go bishop c4 here, attacking the queen. Queen d2, and now I play queen a5. Now again, it's kind of interesting. The computer says that if I castle here and play a very slow move like rook e8, white is better, but it's not super special. Now the problem again is that while this might be a way to play, the problem is that white still has very obvious moves. Bring the rook to the center, maybe knight d5, maybe king b1, maybe bishop f4, bishop d4. Very simple play, and I'm down a pawn, and I'm gonna have to find the defensive resources to try to keep playing the position. So I don't really want to do that. So instead I go queen a5 here. Idea is that if white castles, I eat the pawn on a2, and maybe I'm okay. I'm still probably worse, but at least it's even material. Wesley goes a3. And now I play this move d5. Now the reasoning behind d5 is very simple. I wanted the two or three lines I was looking at while Wesley was using a lot of time to play a3 was queen h5, but I simply couldn't find the resource after h3 here. The idea, of course, is that queen h5 stops white from castling to the king side, so white's king is stuck temporarily, but after castles in g4, queen a5 castles, white is simply castled. He's up a pawn. He's going to go knight d5 next move. And again, the computer thinks that black is only marginally worse here, which is kind of funny, but in human play here, psychologically, psychologically, down on the clock, down a pawn, doesn't feel like you have a straightforward path, it would be very easy to fall apart and lose. So I played d5 here, and I was very surprised when Wesley played this knight d1 move. I thought Wesley should just castle. Now, I suspect the reason he didn't castle is he was probably worried about some bishop takes a3 move, but after bishop takes a3 here, for example, white can play his very strong move queen to d4, attacking the pawn on g7 and the pawn on a7, and it looks scary, but if I take on b2 and white takes and I castle, white very simply walks the king back to the center with king d2 and then goes rook a1 with the connected rooks, and white is just up a piece. So I was very surprised he didn't do this. Now, if Wesley had actually castled, what I probably would have played here is I probably would have played this move d4, although apparently the computer says I can play this move queen takes a3, which is once again completely bananas, and not a move that I could find without using a good amount of time, because apparently if white takes, black is like better here. I have rook b8, and this is just insane. I mean, I can even just make the draw to win the Armageddon, but this is way too insane for a puny human like myself to find, so I didn't consider it. What I was actually going to do here was just gambit another pawn, and after queen d4 just castle. I'm down 2 pawns, but now the diagonals are open. I can put my rook in the center, and maybe something will work out. Now, mind you, this is losing, but this was my plan of what I was going to do. Now, there is some chance that maybe Wesley actually saw castles queen takes a3, which is why he rejected it. So he goes knight d1, I play queen c7, now he goes bishop d4, I castle, he plays knight e3 here, rerouting the pony to the center of the board. He wants to castle queenside, but the problem with this line is that now white is better, but probably there's going to be a trade of this bishop for this knight, which means we're going to end up in a situation with opposite color bishops, which gives me very good drawing chances. So I play rook e8, king b1, a5 here. Idea behind a5, very straightforward. I want to put the pawn on a4 to stop white from being able to push b3 and a4 himself. So h4, I trade. I go h5 here, stopping him from playing h5, and now he plays rook he1. Now, I felt that maybe Wesley should have played b3 here. Again, I guess I have d4, something that's fine, but I felt like he should have played b3 or tried to play a4 or something before I got a4 in. Instead, he goes rook e1, I get a4. Now, pawn is on a light square, bishop cannot attack it, b3 is not in play, and around here, I thought there was a very, very good chance I was going to save the game. Bishop d4, I play f6, we trade, he goes rook e1, and here I play queen d7, and he goes rook e3. Now, again, the reason that I felt so confident here is that with opposite color bishops and this lock on the queen side, I felt that I should, practically speaking, be able to save this. So I decided to trade, he takes with a bishop, queen g4, g3, and now I go queen h3. Now, this move, I think, is a mistake because I can't follow it up with what my original intention was. When he goes queen d1 here, the move that I want to play is queen to f1, because after takes is opposite color bishops. But the problem with this endgame is that white can potentially create 2 connected passed pawns here and win the game. Now, again, I don't know what the objective evaluation of this position is, but it felt to me like I'm probably losing. Now, maybe I'm not losing, but somehow this endgame looks very questionable. A4, I guess I can play d4, takes, king d5, and bishop d1, and maybe, just maybe this is some kind of draw. Because I can go king c4 and bishop f3, and I mean this is actually a draw with perfect play, but again, with only minutes on the clock here and not knowing that this endgame is a draw, it's very, very hard to go into this, very, very hard to go into this endgame, because if the pawns get rolling, like let's just say I go here and white gets this, for example, this is GG, a5, a6, king a5, b6, b7, and I lose the game. So I wanted to play this, but then as I started thinking, it's like, okay, but his moves are too easy, I'm gonna have to find some miraculous setup with my king and my bishop to save the game, so I can't really do it. So instead I go queen f5, king c1 is played, queen e5, bishop d4. Now we sort of play some waiting moves again until we get to this position where Wesley tries to bring the king in. He wants to go king c3, b3, and then king b4 later. And already here I felt very uncomfortable. So I go queen d7, king h7, b3, bishop b5. Of course I do not trade, because now after takes a4, white has 2 connected pawns, and they're very, very good winning chance for white. Also because my king is way off on h7, super far away from the action on the queen side. So I play bishop b5, queen c5. Of course, white never wants to trade, because now it's going to be very hard to dislodge this bishop on a4. And also, in the setup with only the lone a pawn, the drawing chances in any bishop and pawn endgame are very, very high. So he goes queen c5, I start waiting again, he goes back. Now, white could take this pawn again, but the thing is, if white takes the pawn, I plop the bishop on c4 where it's guarded by the pawn, black can never really remove it, and even after a5, king h7, it's very hard for white to play a6. If you go queen b6, I can play queen c8, covering the square, and you can never dislodge this bishop from c4, no matter what you do. So I think there are very good drawing chances from a practical standpoint. So Wesley does not do it, plays king c3, I go back, just guarding the pawn. Goes back, more dilly-dallying. We wait around here. We finally get back to this position where queen e3 is played. Now I play queen e7. Again, I would love to trade, but without knowing after takes and king c3, king b4, I just can't go into that end game. If I had a computer that told me it's a draw, of course I would play it. But without actually knowing whether the end game is technically drawn, I just can't do it. So I go queen d7. Also, I can't do it because here I have a very straightforward setup. I'm going to keep my king close to the pawn. I'm going to keep the queen and the bishop on these two squares where they guard the pawn on a4 and the pawn on d5, and white has to come up with a plan. If white ever goes b4, bishop b5, now the pawns are blockaded once again, where I can just sort of plop the bishop on c4. You can't really push either the c or the b pawns, and they're very good drawing chances. So white has to come up with a plan. Also c4, I can just trade and go queen b7 check. Very, very good drawing chances. So I have my setup here, and now it's on Wesley to try to break the fortress. So he goes bishop c5, I go back, and now he plays queen e7. Again, more dilly-dallying here. And in this position, Wesley finally makes a blunder. Hallelujah. He plays this move f3. Now, Wesley played f3 because he wanted to go g4, but he simply overlooked that now I can actually capture. Because if white captures with the pawn, I have queen e2 check, and I win the pawn on f3, and this king is going to be very weak. After king c3, I don't even have to take f3 because then the king gets loose, but I can go queen to e1 check, and after king c2 I can just make a draw because a draw is good enough and I advance. So Wesley takes with the king, but now I check, king b2, and I go queen to e2. And already everything has gone completely wrong because the pawn on a3 cannot go up the board. c2 is weak, f3 is weak, and my king is very, very safe here on h7 with all these pawns nearby. So we get queen c7, I check here. Now I could have taken on f3, this is fine. I also could have played queen c4 here, but the thing is, again, without knowing 100% with 100% certainty that this endgame is actually a draw, it's very, very hard to go into this endgame where the pawn and the king are marching up the board. Now obviously it is a draw, but I don't know in that split second whether it is, and so I chose not to play it. So I go queen b5 check, king c3, and I go king g6 here. Now it's worth noting that I could have played queen e2 here because after king b4 I can just check again, but I just played king g6 trying to dodge anything. Also, I want to keep queens on the board in this endgame because I always have very simple checks. I have queen c6, queen c4, queen a5 down the road, so Wesley has to find moves. So he goes king d2, play queen f1, he goes queen c3, I check, and now I eat the pawn on g3. And already with this open king here and the fact that white doesn't have any kind of connected pawns, the chances of winning are very, very slim. Wesley checks, I go back, queen f5, I take on h4, he takes on d5, I go king g6. Now, white has two pawns here on the queen side, but again, these pawns are split, the bishop stops the both pawns really here, and he's got a weak king. So already here, I knew that if I didn't do something insane, I would win the game. So we get king b2, queen f4 here. Very simple move, by the way, just stop white from checking on e4, and I want to just push the pawn up the board as fast as possible. Queen c4 is played, I check, he goes king c3, and now I play queen b5 here, which is a very important move because it forces a trade of the queens. Now, with the 3-on-1 on the king side, I know that I have enough counterplay to draw, and additionally, there's a third component which matters as well. It's also the wrong color pawn. The bishop is a dark square bishop, the a square is a light square, so I knew that I'm going to, at the very least, be able to trade these pawns off and sack the bishop for the pawn. So one example, just to illustrate it for you guys, is something like this, where I go here, and then I just sack, I go back, and my king gets to the corner here, and this is just a very simple draw because it's the wrong color bishop. So already when I played queen b5 here, I knew that queens come off the board, and I knew that in one way or another, I'll be able to trade the f pawn and sack for the c pawn at the very worst. So I knew here that I was going to advance. Wesley trades, king b4, I go bishop e2, plays a4, I take, goes c4, king f5, king c5, king to e6, and here Wesley resigns the game because after king b6, I go king d7, and when he plays a5, h4, a6, h3, bishop g1, now I can go g5, c5, and f5 because white cannot get the pawns any further up the board. You cannot move the king forward, the bishop covers a square. If you queen I take, you can't push the pawn forward, and now with the wide peepos, the game is simply over. I go f3, and then I go h2, takes, and f2, I make a queen, and I win. So in this position here, after king e6, Wesley resigns the game. I survive the Armageddon game. I do get a win, and tomorrow I will be playing in the grand finals against Magnus Carlsen once again after winning today. The big difference between tomorrow's match and the match that we played yesterday is that I will have to win 2 matches of 4 games of 15 minutes plus 2-second increment instead of winning 1 match. So I'm going to have to beat him in 1 match, then win a second match to win. It's definitely going to be difficult, but I will give you guys, I'll bring my best effort to the table, and hopefully you guys will enjoy it. So on that note, I hope you enjoyed this recap of this match against Wesley from the Chess Champions Tour being held on chess.com. Make sure to hit that subscribe button below if you have not already, and I will be back tomorrow with a recap. Whether I win, whether I lose, I can't draw, right? Whether I win, whether I lose against Magnus, we'll be back with a recap tomorrow. So I hope you enjoyed it, and see everybody very, very soon. Bye.